123. Another good deed today. After a moment of his mind going adrift, Klein rubbed his temples and slowly composed himself. He discovered that the matter had little to do with him. He wasn't motivated to participate in the matter. He was apathetic to whether the low-end military found Turani von Helmosuin because he lacked a sense of belonging to the low-end kingdom. What he had done in the past was solely to ensure a stable society and that its citizens wouldn't suffer any accidental damage. If possible, he didn't mind instigating a revolution to allow the poor to lead better lives. I never expected myself to become more of an internationalist after coming to this world. He gave a self-deprecating laugh as he prepared to return to the real world and have some sleep. Under the cloak of darkness, he would allow the tempest outside to freely unleash its might. At this moment, his attention was caught by the biggest item in the junk pile through the corner of his eyes, the radio transceiver. Speaking of which, what is the faction controlling Turani von Helmosuin? It's nothing much if it's people from Queen Mystic Bernadette's side. She's a strong believer of do as you wish, but do no harm, so she wouldn't do anything overboard. It wouldn't be good if it's the Rose School of Thought, represented by Admiral of Blood. Ignoring the Temperance faction that's being suppressed, as believers of the Chained God or Mother Tree of Desire, their level of vileness can't be lower than the Aurora Order. Letting them grasp the most advanced technology available might bring about a disaster. Klein stopped his actions of wrapping his body with his spirituality. He gently tapped the edge of the mottled table. He soon had an idea, which was to bring the radio transceiver back to the real world, adjust it to the correct frequency to see if he could receive the telegrams from Admiral of Blood's crew. Then he could use the code book he had to decipher the communications. There will be a huge sweep of the city tonight. The matter must be at a rather important and intricate point. If the ones controlling Helmosuin are them, there's a possibility of the appearance of crucial telegram exchanges. In a situation in which the Governor-General's office, the Lowen military, and the Church of Storms haven't placed importance or even accepted this technology, this is the safest method. Therefore, Admiral of Blood and company have a non-zero chance that they wouldn't change the frequency and codes after Old Quinn's death. Anyway, I'll just give it a try. After some deliberation, Klein didn't delay as he returned to the real world and busily prepared a bestowment ritual. After bringing the radio transceiver into his room, he didn't immediately use it. Instead, he used a ritual dagger and created a wall of spirituality to seal the room. He was doing it to air out the gray fog's smell. To him, there was actually no need to go through so much trouble to confirm the faction that controlled Helmosuin. He could have used the gray fog's aura to contact Orodes and receive the answer. But the problem was that he had posed his questions recently, and the smell that frequently appeared might incur the notice of evil gods like the True Creator or the primordial demoness. It was extremely dangerous. Therefore, Klein decided to play safe by relying on himself. After about 8 minutes, when the airing was almost complete, he dispelled the wall of spirituality and controlled the radio transceiver to begin his surveillance. And still, after an unknown period of time, the corresponding frequency received a transmission. Klein held back the joy in his heart as he seriously made notes. Then he flipped through the code book which he had replicated using divination, and he began the necessary deciphering process. Soon he wrote a line on a note. 32 Black Pepper Avenue, 7 a.m. tomorrow. Indeed, the people in control of Helmosuin are Admiral of Blood and company. There might be powerhouses from the Rose School of Thought involved. Klein immediately made a judgment. This wasn't confirmed based on the content of the telegram, but a simple inference from the existence of the telegram itself. If Admiral of Blood and company were uninvolved, it was unlikely for them to send and receive telegrams involving Byam streets. The meaning of this telegram is to gather by 32 Black Pepper Street tomorrow, before 7 a.m. Does it mean that Helmusuin and Silver Coin Viper Odor are hiding there, and they're reporting to Admiral of Blood of their location and giving a corresponding time? Klein thought for a moment and immediately returned above the gray fog. With the intel he had just received, he wrote the divination statement. To Rani von Helmusuin's present location. With the paper in hand, he leaned back into the chair and chanted the statement in a raving-like manner as he entered a dream with cogitation. In the gray, hazy world, he saw an underground hall with countless gas wall lamps. Inside the hall was a massive, complicated machine. It was constructed from copper cylinders, operating levers, take-up levers, and countless gears. It took up nearly 2/3 of the space. A thin elder with grizzled, disheveled hair wore a thick coat as he paced in front of the machine. From time to time, he would pop a sweet into his mouth and munch on it noisily. No, it shouldn't be called a difference engine. It's an adorable fellow who can analyze questions and calculate the answer based on a set of procedures. Yes, its name should be a calculator. The elder kept muttering to himself as Klein's vision was pulled upwards and out the underground hall, arriving at the building above. It was a 3-story villa with a garden and lawn. Outside was its address, and it reads, 32 Black Pepper Avenue. He really is here. Klein opened his eyes as he silently exhaled. Then he was stumped about what to do next. A scientist like him is useless to me. Instead, it's the root of many problems. I can't just keep him above the gray fog. Therefore, there's no need for me to personally get involved and take him away. Hand over the news to the Lowen military or the Church of Storms. This will effectively prevent the Rose School of Thought from obtaining any benefits. But there's a faction in the military that is likely related to the true culprit behind the great smog of Backland. It's not a good thing to have Helmusuin fall into their hands. The Church of Storms is well known for being rash. A conflict might end up with the scientist meeting the deity he believes in. After some careful deliberation, he gradually had a bold idea. It was to make the news public. He would make the existence and location of Turani von Helmusuin known to the Lowen Kingdom military and the churches. This could effectively ensure that the scientist's capabilities would be employed by the Lowen Kingdom itself, and not any one's faction. The key is balance. Klein smiled as he muttered. He then beckoned with his hand for the Sea God's scepter. For the former him, he had to carefully distribute flyers across the city to make a matter public and known to all. But now, he had an even simpler and effective method. He selected a believer who happened to be praying, and then pulled his view back as the surrounding area, spanning 5 kilometers, entered his vision. Then, with the Sea God's scepter, he wielded control of the wind. Once the wind calmed down, Klein's will sank into the scene as he changed his voice, saying with a low roar, Helmusuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. Whoosh! In Byam, the howl of the wind turned intense as it swept in every direction, bringing with it the deep and loud voice. Helmusuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. Helmusuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. This voice soon spread across Byam like a broadcast to the entire city. Silver Coin Viper Odor was donning a cloak, pretending to be Helmusuin. He hid himself in a crowded building in the slums, occasionally appearing to mislead MI9 and the Governor General's office's police officers. Suddenly, a gale swept past as the voice sounded in his ears. Helmusuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. What? As the voice resounded, Oder fell into a dazed shock. Without noticing it, he fell from the top of the roof and nearly injured himself badly. Behind the Cathedral of Waves, and in a small nearby building of the Governor General's office, Jan Kotman and Robert Davis heard the voice in the wind. The first reaction they had was to look up at the sky before casting their eyes towards the borough where Black Pepper Avenue was. After the broadcast and being in a good mood, Klein threw the Sea God scepter back into the junk pile and returned to the real world. He wasn't in a rush to bring the radio transceiver back above the gray fog. Instead, he left it there as he continued monitoring the transmissions. This way, even if there are powerhouses from the Rose School of Thought hidden in Bayham, they wouldn't dare appear. And regardless who takes action, they'll have no choice but to hand it over to the country. Unfortunately, I don't have the habit of writing a diary like the Emperor. Otherwise, I could write something like, "I did another good deed today." Klein silently sighed, took off his coat, got into bed, and slept. He didn't care what was going to happen next, as it had nothing to do with him. After sleeping for an unknown period of time, he suddenly woke up and sat up. Then there was knocking on his door. Who could it be? To knock in the middle of the night? "I'm currently John Yod." Klein wore creeping hunger and took out Death Knell from under his pillow before coming to the door. The visitor's looks quickly surfaced in his mind. It was a thin elder with grizzled, disheveled hair. He was wearing a coat stuffed with cotton and a tweed overcoat. He was popping a coffee-colored sweet into his mouth. Turani von Helmusuin. Holy fee asterisk. Why is he here looking for me? I'm just the ordinary John Yoda. Also, how did he escape the tracking of a demigod? Klein's first reaction was to tell the man that he had gotten the wrong person, but he held back and asked, "Who are you looking for?" Helmusuin smiled weakly and said, "I noticed you when we were in the seaweed bar. However, I didn't have a chance to talk to you." My life is at its end, so I recently recalled many things. Please allow me to introduce myself. You can call me Orange Light Hilarion." Orange Light Hilarion? Klein was taken aback before he asked in puzzlement, "Is there something?" Helmusuin chuckled. "I'm here to warn you. Be careful of the Mother Tree of Desire." He paused for a moment before saying, "All right, I need to leave, and I'm about to die before returning to the spirit world. Do you have any enemies here?" "Why do you ask?" Klein asked, confused. Helmusuin coughed and said, "I can silently die at their doorstep. That way you would have your revenge." Chapter 724. The True Meaning Behind the Warning. Upon hearing Helmusuin's reply, Klein couldn't help but twitch the corner of his lips. He nearly froze on the spot. "My enemies aren't in Bayham. Even if you were to die at Sea King's doorstep, it wouldn't be of much use." He slowly drew a breath and didn't continue the topic. Instead, he asked, "Helmusuin, no. Mr. Hilarion, how did you notice me? You even came here before your death to specially warn me." This was also the puzzlement he had towards Arrows and Raynet Tinnaker. He just never had a chance to ask them. With the door in between them, Helmusuin fell silent for 2 seconds. Then he said, with a smile in his tone, "There are some tiny unique traits about you. In high-level creatures of the spirit world, it's no secret. It's noticeable as long as they make contact with you in close proximity. After all, the gray fog that represents the great ruler of the spirit world is above our heads. Deities with certain unique authorities or beyonders who represent fate can also discover this point to a certain extent. Of course, the premise is that close contact has to be made. Gray fog. Although Orange Light's explanation and Arod's compliments are nearly identical, He is the first person I've met that directly pointed out the gray fog to me to my face. Therefore, the mysterious space is the divine kingdom above the spirit world, left behind by the great ruler. Which Sequence Zero pathway is this? The deities who can discover that I'm augmented by the gray fog include the Mother Tree of Desire, so she was able to target me. Klein's thoughts bubbled like boiling water as all sorts of questions popped in his head. Just as he was about to speak, Helmasuin had continued, "In Yellow Light's prophecy, the great ruler above the spirit world is one of the variables of the apocalypse. However, I cannot be sure that you are equivalent to him. There are too many possibilities for you that allow that unique trait. For example, you being his blessed, his child, or his chosen oracle. But none of this stops me from expressing my friendship. Ahem. You know about Backlund's stock exchange, right? You're like a railway company that just got listed. You seem to have a bright future ahead. Some people will naturally think well of you and purchase a certain number of shares, but there will be no lack of people who are greedy. They wish to use other means to seize this company or obtain the controlling rights. I'm part of the former, while Mother Tree of Desire and even more powerful spirit world creatures are part of the latter. Is that so? If it wasn't because the transmigrator Emperor Roselle, who existed before me, had some level of interaction with the gray fog, and if I hadn't divined my origins in that mysterious space and received clear scenes of Earth, allowing me to recall even more of my memories, I would have suspected if I was the reincarnation of the great ruler above the spirit world. Taking everything into account from this experience, Emperor Roselle and I are more like the chosen oracles. The great ruler above the gray fog is equivalent to the celestial worthy of heaven and earth. Klein couldn't help but generate all kinds of conjectures as his mind was in a mess, like a cat playing a ball of yarn. He calmed his emotions and said, "Is there any way to hide this unique trait?" "Become a demigod." Helmasuin suddenly coughed after answering. "Do you mind if I die at your doorstep?" Yes. Klein didn't wish to draw the attention of Sea King Jan Kotman, Naval Admiral Robert Davis, and other demigods. Helmasuin munched at his sweet and said, "Then I'll have to leave immediately, or else there wouldn't be time. After you become a demigod and have the powers to probe deep into the spirit world, we might have a chance of meeting." Klein was silent for 2 seconds before saying, "Thank you for your warning, Mr. Hilarion." Helmasuin didn't reply as he lumbered to the staircase. As he listened to the footsteps down the stairs, Klein focused. Suddenly he had a certain theory about why Emperor Roselle had failed to enter, despite discovering the existence of the gray fog. He restored that silver plate which resulted in his transmigration far after he became a Beyonder. As for me, I was already an ordinary person when I attempted the luck enhancement ritual again. Also, Emperor Roselle chose the Savant pathway, while I took the Seer pathway. The mysterious space above the gray fog clearly provides great aid in divination. Therefore, the prerequisites for entering the space above the gray fog is to be an ordinary person or be a Beyonder of the Seer pathway, as well as knowing of the corresponding incantation, rituals, and symbols. The Emperor's experiments were too late, and he had chosen the wrong pathway, so he naturally had no means of entering it. With how the Seer, Apprentice, and Marauder pathways are considered neighboring pathways, perhaps the former two would work too. Could this be the deeper reason why the Emperor made the poignant point in his diary that he should have chosen one of these 3 pathways? Apart from not having any sequence 0 for these 3 pathways, preventing any influence from the peak, it's also the key to entering the gray fog. As his thoughts churned, Klein placed this matter, which he couldn't obtain any confirmation of, at the back of his mind. He began considering Orange Light Hilarion's warning. "Be careful of the Mother Tree of Desire." Due to the incident as Admiral Amirius, Klein was rather wary against the Mother Tree of Desire. He had no choice but to change his identity and use the need for him to act so as to hide for 2 months. Subsequently, he wasn't too willing to provoke Admiral of Blood and other members of the Rose School of Thought, afraid that he would fall into a trap. Towards the extreme danger lurking around, a normal human's first thought was to resolve the matter. It was likewise the same for Klein. However, the problem was that he had no solutions. The Mother Tree of Desire was suspected to be a Sequence Zero true god located in the astral world. Even if Klein jumped up, there was no way he could hit her or defeat her. And the faction, the Rose School of Thought, that she controlled, was an organization with quite a long history. It likely had angels presiding over it and had Grade Zero sealed artifacts. Otherwise, it was very difficult for them to survive to this day with the churches and all the secret organizations at odds with it. Therefore, even if Klein had plans of getting the help of Mr. Azik or other powerful figures, there was no way he could uproot the Rose School of Thought. It was even possible that they would encounter danger. Due to these reasons, Klein could only hide and hope that he could successfully advance to Sequence 4 and become a demigod. I've always been careful against the Mother Tree of Desire. Mr. Orange Light Hilarion didn't know that I once fell for the evil god's trap at Oravi Island? Or did he specially come over to warn me that she would be doing something major soon? He was previously under Admiral of Blood's control, and Admiral of Blood is a member of the Rose School of Thought. He might very well know of something. Klein was instantly alarmed. He didn't just blindly believe that a faceless transformation was enough to fool the Mother Tree of Desire's attention. According to Orange Light Hilarion's explanation, she would be able to discover certain unique traits when in close proximity with me. This is something the faceless Beyonder powers are unable to mask. She hasn't done anything in a while. Could it be that she is attempting to use this sensation to bestow something to her believers through some ritual or item, and that she is about to succeed soon? Klein slowly frowned as he felt that it was certainly a possibility. This made him more eager to return to Backland. In that huge city, even angels had to behave themselves, just like a particular snake of fate. The believers of the Mother Tree of Desire and the powerhouses of the Rose School of Thought were unable to act as they wished. All they could do was wait for an opportunity. Phew. Klein exhaled and headed above the gray fog. He divined if his life would be in danger soon. This time he received a negative answer. His life wouldn't be in danger. However, Klein didn't relax as a result. He recalled that the Mother Tree of Desire's divination interference could penetrate the gray fog shielding to a certain extent. And very long ago, his spirituality had prevented him from divining the werewolf Beyonder, characteristic above the gray fog. This was because it might very well involve the Chained God. And the Chained God was suspected to be another manifestation of the Mother Tree of Desire. Either there's really nothing going on and that I'm overthinking matters, or the danger is already very close. That's why the Mother Tree of Desire took action to interfere. To be safe, I need to make preparations. Even if it's proven to be a false alarm, it's still better than being captured by the Rose School of Thought and taken away by the Mother Tree of Desire to perform some unspeakable matters. Klein immediately returned to the real world and took out a pen and paper before quickly writing a letter. He started with, "Dear Mr. Azik, considering how the underworld was inside the spirit world, that the demigods of the death pathway were considered high-ranking spirit world creatures in a certain way, and that Mr. Azik might be able to see his unique trait after he recovered his memory, Klein was rather honest. He directly wrote about the entire conversation between Orange Light Hilarion's manifestation, Helma Suin, the scientist. The only thing he left out was about the gray fog and the parts about the great existence above the gray fog. Finally, he mentioned something. Does Mr. Hilarian's warning imply that I'll suffer mortal danger from the Rose School of Thought? After he folded the letter and blew the copper whistle to summon the messenger, Klein still didn't find it safe enough. He hurriedly took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew into it. Silently, Raynet Tinker appeared before him. Each of the 4 heads with blonde hair and red eyes rotated and said, "There's no letter. I have something to discuss with you." Klein forced a big smile. He handed over the gold coin he received from Anderson and said, "This is the fee for the summoning." One of the heads Raynet Tinker held bit onto the gold coin. The 2 other heads that didn't get the chance to speak asked, "What is it?" "I might face a certain degree of danger soon. I wonder if it's possible to summon you for help." Klein tried his best to make his eyes look sincere. The 8 eyes on Raynet Tinker's forehead darted around as they said, "Yes. Pay 10,000. Gold coins. 10,000 gold coins. That's 10,000 pounds. Klein turned agape as he said with a wry smile, "I don't have that much money." Raynet Tinker's 4 heads spoke one after another. "You can pay by installments. Installments." Klein was surprised that his messenger kept with the times. After 2 seconds of shock, he said, "All right." Raynet Tinker didn't say anything else as her 4 heads nodded simultaneously before disappearing in front of Klein and returning to the spirit world. Chapter 7, 125, Morning. Upon seeing the messenger disappear, Klein thought of the demigods he could contact on short notice, but he realized that there weren't any. All he could do was turn his attention onto what he should do next. The city-wide broadcast must have made Sea King Jan Kotman not only find Helmosuin, but he would also do his best to search for Sea God and the traces of his believers. It's easy to be detected if I leave in the middle of the night, so I can only choose to stay here until daybreak. I can't take that ship tomorrow. If I encounter an attack midway, I might affect everyone on the ship. Furthermore, it's not discreet enough. I can summon an undersea creature and leave by riding it. I can rest and switch rides on the deserted islands and reefs we encounter along the way until I arrive at the next port. Since Orange Light said that the unique trait can only be detected at close distances, it still won't exceed the size of a city, even if the Mother Tree of Desire tries to expand her perception range to find me via a ritual or her believers. It might even be limited to the size of a particular street. This is also why I encountered a trap when I arrived in Orvie. As long as I leave Bayam, I should be able to escape from their gaze. While Klein's thoughts gradually turned clear, he suddenly heard a signal from the radio transceiver. He hurriedly went over and quickly jotted it down. Then, with the code book, he transcribed the corresponding words into a single sentence. Before long, the telegram's content appeared on paper in jet black. "I see you. I see you." When Klein read those words, he felt a chill run through his heart. Bayam, in an ordinary residence not far from the Governor General's office. In a spacious basement, there were candles silently burning, scattering their dim glow around the surroundings. Silver Coin Viper odor had already taken off his hooded robe. He looked at the middle-aged man opposite him as he trembled. He said with a quivering voice, "Lord Senor, I don't know how Helmosuin's real hiding place was known by others as well." Senor wore an old triangular hat. His eye sockets were recessed and his face was shockingly pale. He looked more like an evil spirit than a human. He raised his hand to stroke the 2 black mustaches above his lips as his light brown eyes coldly swept across Oda's face. In response, the well-known adventurer couldn't help but lower his head. After observing him for a few seconds, Admiral of Blood in his white trousers and red coat said with a deep voice, "Less than 3 minutes after that telegram was sent, it was spread across the entire city, and the message spread was part of the telegram. I suspect that another faction has begun paying notice to radio transmissions, and they had obtained our codebook from Old Quinn." Yes, it has to be the case," Oder hurriedly echoed, hoping that Admiral of Blood wouldn't pin the loss of Helmosuin as him being inept. He knew very well that this pirate admiral was cruel to subordinates who made mistakes. Senor swept his gaze at Oder and sneered. "Regardless, you failed. If not for you and your mistress giving me plenty of joy, I would have gotten you to dig out your intestines. Send a telegram. Tell that listener who might or might not exist that I can see him. Let him spend the night in horror and unease. This is the only thing you need to do now." Upon hearing that, Oder immediately heaved a sigh of relief. He glanced at Admiral of Blood in trepidation and the bloody altar behind him, before reverently replying, "Yes, Lord Senor." He felt that he would have become part of the sacrificial items just moments ago. After Oder retreated out of the basement, Senor turned his head to look at the altar covered with human heads, organs, limbs, and blood. He said in a manner even more reverent than how Oder treated him, "Lord Shanks, has the ritual succeeded?" "Yes, all that's left is to wait for God to respond." A cold, unfeeling voice sounded from the drooping curtains around the altar. Then the curtains seemed to possess life as they rolled up on both sides, smoothly forming a knot before landing in the middle of the altar. A somewhat translucent figure appeared by the side of the altar at some point in time. His skin was slightly brown, and his wrinkles formed deep crevices. His white, thinned hair was like leaves in autumn, as though they had lived for many, many years. He humbly fixated his gaze at the candlelight with his brown eyes. Senor didn't dare say a word as he stood beside Lord Shanks, awaiting for any changes to happen to the altar. Suddenly the candle's flame was dyed with all kinds of colors. Each color seemed to correspond to the different desires of an observer. The heads, organs, limbs, and blood on the altar moved by themselves as they stacked up together, forming the state of a melted candle. Before long, they formed a tree of flesh and blood that wasn't too tall. Its surface was uneven, resembling the shell of a walnut. Plop, plop, plop. The interior of the tree of flesh and blood seemed to have a heart beating forcefully with strength. When Senor was about to succumb to the din, the tree of flesh and blood instantly withered, rotting into slosh and collapsing. There was a tiny flesh-colored, moist, sticky ball left behind. Soon the tiny ball grew 4 limbs and a head, turning into a palm-sized humanoid creature. Its face didn't have any eyes, nose, or ears, other than a pinhole-like mouth. In its mouth, grayish-white fog spewed out before converging back in. It repeated several times without stopping. The elder named Shanks devoutly and passionately chanted the name Mother Tree of Desire, and reached out to grab the strange tiny figure. Silently, all the candlelights were extinguished, but to a wraith who had night vision, this didn't affect them from seeing things. Senor observed Shanks and heard this important person say in a deep voice, "We've prepared for a long time for this ritual, and God's grace can help us sense the existence of the target through a wider range. Next, we can use the glasses made by the Life School of Thought to accurately locate him." As he spoke, Shanks took out a monocle from his inner pocket. It didn't look any different from a normal monocle, but it coruscated with a pearly white luster in the darkness. "Lord Shanks, "What should we do next?" Senor asked respectfully. The wrinkled Shanks thought for a few seconds and said, "Seek out the target after daybreak. If he has powerful helpers, we will monitor him and prevent him from leaving our detection range. Then patiently await Lord Suar's arrival. If he doesn't have any guardians and is weak himself, then we shall take action directly." After hearing the word Suar, the corners of Senor's forehead twitched as though just the mere mention of this important figure left him apprehensive. He slowly took a deep breath and said, "Yes, Lord Shanks." After answering, Senor instinctively touched the necklace by his chest. The necklace seemed to be made of pure silver, and the pendant looked like an ancient coin. Klein, who didn't get much sleep for the rest of the night due to the fright from receiving the telegram, immediately sacrificed his suitcase, wallet, and most of his cash to the mysterious space above the gray fog at daybreak. After clearing up his tracks, he went to the front desk to check out. He rode a carriage to the borders of Byam, left the city and climbed the mountain as though he was heading for a cemetery, prepared for locals. Midway through his journey, he suddenly took a detour into the woods and planned on walking straight to the cliffs, where a massive undersea creature was waiting underneath for him. The birds chirped and the insects buzzed in the woods as critters would occasionally scuttle by. Klein walked through the humic material-covered grounds at high speed. Along the way, he saw mushrooms growing after the rain, torn cloth and rubbish which the Byam residences had left behind after a picnic. Everything seemed so serene alongside the fresh morning air. A leaf fluttered down as Klein didn't stop and easily dodged it. At that moment, the leaf's speed sped up and did a surprising bend, clinging to him in between his lips and nose. Oh, it was like an adult's palm that clasped his mouth and nose tightly, making it impossible for him to breathe. "Sue! Sue! Sue!" The surrounding trees had their branches fall off as they shot at Klein like sharp arrows. And the rubbish left from the picnic received a life of their own. They formed an airtight net as they came looming over. Chapter 7, 126. Preparations are very important. Suddenly, Klein had a familiar feeling. It felt like every tree, every leaf, every rock, every blade of grass wanted him dead. Upon seeing the rubbish comprising of fragments and paper lunge at him in a strange web, his body suddenly collapsed into a paper figurine. "Sue! Sue! Sue!" The arrow-like branches impaled the paper figurines and landed into the distance. As for the strange net, it immediately enveloped everything within into a ball as it gently squirmed. Klein's body appeared to the side about 8 meters away. He knew that the attack he was worried about had finally descended upon him. He didn't make any observations or show any hesitation. Raising his right palm, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the adventurer's harmonica. The situation he had encountered had made him realize that the attacker was likely a demigod from the Rose School of Thought. It was an enemy he was currently unable to defend against. The one who had been pursuing Sharon back then gave him a similar feeling. At this moment, the paper figurines in his pocket suddenly flew out as they plastered over his face, one after another, layer after layer. At the same time, Klein's sleeves automatically tightened as they bound both his arms, preventing his palms from reaching down. His Taraba shirt and brown jacket were tightening like a bear giving him a hug. In seconds, he was bound on the spot by his clothes, trousers, and shoes. His face was covered with paper figurines, as his ribs were on the brink of fracturing. He found it abnormally difficult to breathe. Klein was mentally prepared and was equipped with rich combat experience, so he didn't panic. His right thumb and middle finger, which weren't affected, touched each other as he snapped his fingers. At his ham, scarlet flames immediately soared up, burning the tightly bound trousers clean before spreading upwards and downwards. Seizing this opportunity, Klein bent his knees and jumped up with great difficulty, like a cannonball that weakly fell to the ground moments after being launched as he lunged to his right. In midair, he snapped his fingers again. This time, the sleeve by the right arm joint was ignited. As for the spot where he was originally standing, the green weeds suddenly withered as the blackened ground suddenly turned white, as if it had been weathered by the elements. This attack was silent and deadly, without any forewarning. Klein knew that his enemy was powerful, and that staying in the same spot would likely result in him suffering an attack he couldn't resist. Therefore, he first removed the influence on his legs. If he hadn't done so, he would have already been heavily injured and lose his ability to do combat. He might have even perished. With a smacking sound, two spots around Klein's sleeves ignited. His right palm finally had the freedom to move as he reached into his pocket and grabbed the adventurer's harmonica. Plop! He fell to the ground, rolling as he immediately stopped himself with his right hand to bounce up. His left palm, which wore a human-skinned glove, snapped its fingers. This time, his target was the paper figurines that were plastered over his face to prevent him from breathing. Paw! The paper figurines burned up as the scarlet tongues of fire burned Klein's hair. At that moment, a scene suddenly flashed in his mind. An icicle had formed and was speeding right for his head like a thin, gloomy green arrow. Due to its speed, it was translucent itself, making it usually impossible to discover it. But even though Klein's danger premonition was triggered, it was a little too late. This was because his clothes were still affecting his mobility. It was too late for him to dodge the attack. A thought flashed through his mind as he barely bent his back. His upper torso was bent backward, and he moved quite significantly to his right. Oof! The thin, cold ice arrow struck his left chest, instantly shattering the brown jacket and white round collar shirt, which were located there as they scattered into the air. However, this lethal ice arrow didn't continue heading forward. This was because in its way was a book with a dark brown cover. The book appeared ordinary, and it was bound into a book with commonly seen yellowish-brown goatskin, but it didn't shatter like the two pieces of clothing. There wasn't even a hole pricked open. Grossel's Travels. This was an item that even the sea god Scepter's lightning storm, imbued with some powers of the mysterious space, had failed to damage. Last night, the telegram of "I see you" gave Klein such a fright that he undoubtedly reinforced his protective countermeasures. He prepared every method he could think of. Apart from hiding the book at his vital spot, his other pocket had the iron cigar case which stored the influence of the corrupted true creator. Once things went bad, he would dispel the wall of spirituality, throw out the item, and see if it would draw the attention of the true creator. He hoped that he would send his powerful subordinates to make the situation more chaotic. He knew that even evil gods like the true creator hated the mother tree of desire. After withstanding the ice arrow, Klein fell to the ground while somersaulting to the side. He then brought the adventurer's harmonica to his lips and blew hard into it. At that moment, his face was turning a little black due to the burning of the paper figurines, but due to flame controlling, he wasn't injured. Then he felt that the clothes on his left arm, waist, thighs, neck, and legs were restored to normal, giving him newfound freedom. At the moment he blew the harmonica, he quickly activated his spirit vision. He saw Miss Messenger walk out of the void with 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand. They automatically turned and stared at the same spot. One of the heads grunted as it opened its mouth and began drawing in air. A cold wind hummed as a figure was forcibly pulled out from a green tree 100 meters away from Klein. This figure failed to maintain his difficult-to-detect state as he rapidly turned half-transparent and half-corporeal. He was the wrinkled elder with white, thin hair. His facial features had the traits of the people of the southern continent. Just as his brown eyes reflected Raynet Tinnaker, his brows pricked up. Then he didn't hesitate to open his mouth as though he was about to deliver an extreme curse that he had been preparing for a long time. At this moment, another one of the heads which Raynet Tinker was holding had opened its mouth as well, as though it was making a silent screech. Oh, with that, nothing happened inside the forest. When Shanks saw this, he hurriedly turned his head to look at Klein, who had yet to react in time, when a figure with white, thin hair and exaggerated wrinkles appeared in his eyes. His mind instantly turned cold. Although his thoughts weren't impeded, he had lost control over his body. All he could do was watch the white-haired elder vanish as he turned to face Miss Messenger. The two heads which Raynet Tinker carried suddenly flew out and appeared before Klein. One of them opened its mouth as it drew in air, while the other's red eyes turned dark as its teeth turned long and sharp, phasing between an incorporeal and corporeal state. Klein saw the translucent elder with white, thin hair being forcefully pulled out from his body before Miss Messenger's head, with the long teeth that bit at his shoulder, tearing out an object that appeared both like a spirit body and a physical body. Shanks frowned without screaming. Its figure abruptly vanished as it leaped to a spot with a glass fragment 100 meters away. Following that, he seemed to be pursued by formless hands and enemies. He kept phasing into shallow puddles of water, the eyes of animals, the dew on plants, etc. Finally, he was able to catch a breather, and still, Klein was feeling a little stiff and cold from the inside out. Phew. Shanks entered the spirit world and walked out again. In his hand was a moist, sticky, palm-sized doll. This figure's face only had a hole as it was inhaling and exhaling a grayish-white fog, which Klein found familiar. Shanks didn't hesitate as he stuffed the doll into his mouth. Upon seeing this, Raynet Tinnaker's other two heads left her palm, and like before, flew towards Shanks at a fast speed, arriving nearly instantly. However, Shanks had already begun transforming. His body turned black as his skin scrunched up and water began seeping out. His hair, brows, and other parts began withering and dropping. Following that, his limbs grew long and thin. In just a second, Shanks seemed to be assimilated by the doll, becoming a huge black moist infant with long forelimbs and swollen shriveled skin. His eyes, nose, mouth, and ears moved from their original locations to the middle of his face, as though they were gathering together to form a brand new organ. His skin, limbs, and newly formed organ brought an indescribable sense of mystery and wickedness. Just a single look had made his body, which had just recovered from the coldness, feel extremely itchy. Red spots protruded from his skin as a result of the clumps of fine granules. His eyes undoubtedly suffered a piercing pain. He instinctively closed them tight as tears were forced out. Thus, by the time he calmed himself with cogitation and opened his eyes again, he realized that Miss Messenger and the Rose School of Thought's demigod had vanished. However, Klein's spiritual intuition told him that they were nearby. They were in an intense battle shuttling between the real world and the spirit world. Be it the dropping of the leaves, the shaking of the weeds, the crawling of the worms, and the fleeing of the wild beasts, all of them represented each and every clash. As his mind whirred, Klein took out Death Knell and tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice. Countless illusory thin threads appeared in his eyes, making him see objects that usually couldn't be seen with his normal vision or spirit vision. 2 blobs were flying around him, and the dense black bundles of threads that entangled with each other were Raynet Tinnaker and the Rose School of Thought's demigod. A Apart from these, Klein also discovered that a blob of illusory black threads was rapidly approaching him. It would stop from time to time, so as to avoid the intense battle between the two demigods. There's another enemy. An enemy who was hiding in the distance, awaiting the results, but hasn't decided to participate in the battle. Anyways, anyone who's stealthily approaching in such a situation must be an enemy. Klein's eyes moved slightly as he cocked the death knell and lowered it naturally to put it into a state for lethal attack. Then he pretended as though he hadn't detected the bundle of illusory black threads, stuffed his left palm into his pocket, and grabbed a gold coin. He made it tumble between his fingers as though he was in a divination state. He was doing this to disrupt the approacher's spiritual intuition for danger. After losing his paper figurines, this was the only method he had. After patiently waiting for 2 seconds when the other party was within shooting range, Klein's eyes turned solemn as he suddenly raised his right hand, aimed, and pulled the trigger. Sound, Chapter 7, 127, Lucky 1, Thud. The black revolver with the slightly long barrel recoiled backward as a pale golden beam shot out, heading straight for the spot where the target was about to arrive at. However, the illusory black threads suddenly stopped as though they were observing something. From his condition, it didn't appear like he had sensed the arrival of danger, but he had his attention attracted by something else. A grayish-white rabbit leaped out the thick grass and fled far away, as the tree standing in front of the blob of illusory black threads collapsed due to the gunshot. At the height of a human, a gigantic and irregular hole and a raging pure fire appeared at the tree's trunk, directly splitting it from the middle. Death Knell's might was equivalent to a small-caliber cannon, and its penetrating powers were even more potent. The blob of dense, illusory black threads was clearly given a fright, as it instinctively disappeared from where it was, appearing on the surface of a nearby puddle of water. Inevitably, his figure was outlined. He had a pale face with deep, recessed eye sockets and light brown eyes. He looked to be in his 40s, had a double mustache above his lips, and wore an old triangular hat. Klein was no stranger to the man, as his bounty notice often appeared before his eyes. Step by step, they were stacked into a clear image. Admiral of Blood Seigneur. Just in loan alone, his bounty was worth 42,000 pounds. He had long infiltrated Bayam. Was it to take away Turani von Helmasuin? After this scientist passed away due to being discovered, he joined the Rose School of Thought's mission to target me. I seem to have an additional weakness, but before it's triggered, I've no way of knowing what it is. As his thoughts raced, Klein saw Seigneur's figure disappear once again. However, the traces of Admiral of Blood's existence was rather obvious. The blob of illusory black threads of his was like a firefly in the darkness. It wasn't difficult to identify him at all. The blob of illusory black threads circled around him with the aid of the morning dew, glass fragments, and water puddles that had frozen for some reason. Jumping again and again from one medium to the other, the gap between the two soon narrowed. Klein didn't wait on the spot. Instead, he quickly moved, but only slightly, shifted his position so as to prevent the Rose School of Thought demigod, who was engaged in an intense battle, from attacking him in passing. Seigneur's performance made him understand one thing. A wraith's ability to possess someone to directly control their body requires them to enter a certain range. Previously, although the Rose School of Thought demigod was able to accomplish it at further distances, he hadn't done so, perhaps out of contempt or for fear of any accidents. It could be confirmed that Seigneur was a Sequence 5 wraith. Klein kept changing his location, and he awaited the opportunity when the distance between them was more suitable. Just as Admiral of Blood's speed slowed down slightly, and he was about to possess his target from a distance. Klein's left glove suddenly turned deep black, as though it was formed layer by pure particles. Following that, he said a word filled with foulness, a word that came from the devil language. Slow. Senor had sensed it and changed his position before Klein could even open his mouth, but everything within an 8-meter radius came to a halt. His evasive maneuver had failed to show any effects. It was an area of effect attack. Senor's figure suddenly became slow. He once again outlined his figure in the real world as Klein raised his iron-black revolver, cocked it, and placed his target in his sights. With death knell, he saw that Senor's body was covered with all kinds of colors that indicated his weakness wasn't at his head, but slightly above his throat. Without any hesitation or delay, Klein pulled the trigger. Lethal attack. At that moment, a blob of illusory black threads walked to Senor's side and pulled at him. Admiral of Blood immediately moved diagonally as the golden bullet grazed past his neck, striking a boulder and shattering it. A golden flame burst from Senor's neck as it jerked his head up and opened his mouth. A sharp shriek blasted out and entered Klein's ears, causing his mind to hum as his body came to a temporary halt. Formless souls had flown to Senor's side at some point in time before mixing with cold winds. From the sky and from the ground, they surged toward the enemy. In each of Klein's eyes, a pale-looking man with a red coat and triangular hat quickly appeared and took form. Pa! Klein snapped his fingers as his body was instantly enveloped by scarlet flames. He disappeared from his location before the Wraith was able to possess him. And under a tree that was less than 10 meters away, weeds burst into flames as the flames grew bigger and they soared into the sky. Klein nimbly leaped out from it and raised death knell again. He aimed towards the spot where he was originally standing still at, and he injected more than twice the normal amount of spirituality into the gun. Slaughter. Thud. He pulled the trigger as a golden bullet split into countless shrapnel and, with a sacred flame, swept to the region the gun's mouth had aimed at. The formless specters and souls seemed to be swept away by a solar hurricane as they failed to resist and were ignited amidst screaming. Senor knew that a counterattack was in place once his possession attempt didn't succeed. He immediately flashed into a nearby glass fragment in an attempt to evade the incoming shot. But the bullet hurricane brought about by Slaughter was a rather huge range that included that glass fragment. Amidst a huge boom, golden flames struck the sides of the glass without hitting it. With only burn injuries, Senor leaped to another mirror surface and appeared on the surface of a rolling drop of dew a distance away. His body had a rotting wound thanks to the purification powers, but it wasn't anything serious. There's no way he's that lucky, right? Indeed, Senor has a mystical item that makes himself lucky. There are only 3 purifying bullets left. Klein frowned as he agilely ran over as though he was in pursuit. As he knew that he was facing members of the Rose School of Thought, he had changed all the Beyonder bullets in his revolver to purifying bullets that targeted wraiths and zombies. There were a total of 6 bullets, and now he had already shot thrice. In the first shot, Senor was saved by a rabbit that suddenly leaped out. In the second shot, he was yanked away by the Rose School of Thought's demigod, who happened to come beside him. In the third shot, he happened to be in the gap of the fragment amidst the Slaughter hurricane, preventing him from suffering too much damage. Klein found this level of luck completely unacceptable. However, Klein didn't wallow in depression. Instead, he turned back into Gehrman Sparrow's appearance and build. This was for him to immediately throw a bunch of Sea God domain charms to create a certain commotion once things went south, so as to attract the attention of Sea King Jan Kotman. who was in Biome City. If this Sequence 3 demigod were to arrive, he would be facing a Rose School of Thought demigod, a hostile pirate admiral and an adventurer with a mysterious background who had certain ties with the military. It was quite obvious who he would deal with first. As for Miss Messenger, Klein believed that she could escape into the spirit world in a timely fashion, and was free to choose whether to participate in the battle royale or leave. The reason why Klein didn't escape in the middle of the night after receiving the telegram last night was because Sea-King gave him a sense of security. If he were to leave alone, he would definitely be noticed and captured by the Church of Storms. He would be interrogated, making the subsequent developments unpredictable. If he were to stay in his room and await the person who saw him to attack, he had a chance of struggling until he reached the streets, allowing Sea-King to notice it. Faced with an evil operative who was at least a demigod, and a Sequence 5 adventurer who was rumored to have ties with the military, there was no doubt that Jan Kottman would first deal with the Rose School of Thought member. And as a cardinal of the Church of Storms and a high-ranking deacon of the mandated Punishers, he could use various sealed artifacts of the diocese. He could last a moment, even if he faced an angel. At the same time, with the reinforcements from the military, there was a chance for Klein to escape to the sea during the chaos and leave via whale. To his regret, the night remained peaceful after he received the telegram. And once daybreak happened, Sea-King would find it difficult to monitor the entire city. Pa! Klein snapped his fingers again, igniting the surrounding trees. This appeared like blooming fireworks around him, as they exuded an inexplicable sense of beauty. The reason why he had chosen to pass through the forest to head for the cliff was because this was a place that was suitable for a magician's performance. His figure flashed through the flames as he circled around Senor, avoiding his approach and control. And from the previous experience and lessons, Senor knew that his target had an area of effect attack and a damaging blow. He didn't dare stay too close to him, and he would pull away and create a gap once he missed an attack. Otherwise, he would use a Wraith's Shriek to affect his target, or use his pale green fingers to aim at his target. Unfortunately, the latter could only extinguish flames and wither vegetation. There was no way to pinpoint Klein's location. Seeing how the fireworks-like flames were the biggest barrier to his attacks, Senor stopped and let out the deafening shriek, which would also damage a spirit body. Amidst the shriek, the icy blue halo beneath his feet rapidly expanded, covering the mud, randomly strewn weeds, and scattered rocks with a layer of ice. The flames sizzled as they produced tiny amounts of mist before being extinguished by the frost. Klein was influenced by the Wraith's Shriek, causing his flaming jump to be one step too slow. He ended up failing. His figure projected itself midway as his feet stumbled. Shelf. Then he saw illusory skulls swirling with black gas rush at him, bringing with them the strong smell of death, as though an envoy from the underworld had arrived. At that instant, Klein didn't seem like he could dodge. However, a light blue fireball emanating the smell of sulfur suddenly condensed before him. His glove remained black as it remained in its devil state. With a thumping sound, the fireball was extinguished as the illusory skulls shattered and scattered to the ground, creating spots that didn't have any life to them. Right on the heels of that, Klein steadied his body and took out the iron cigar case from his pocket. He threw it at Admiral of Blood Senior as his glove turned noble and sinister at some point in time. Baron of Corruption Bribe. Chapter 7. 128. Triple Combo. Senor obviously wasn't going to bet that the item thrown by his opponent didn't pose a threat. He immediately dodged far away, allowing the iron cigar case, which was sealed by a wall of spirituality, to fall to the ground. Then, he opened his mouth once again and produced a shriek. A roar that seemed to come from the depths of his own spirit body made Klein experience excruciating pain in his head, even though he often suffered from the ravings of existences like the True Creator and Mr. Door, and was rather resistant towards such attacks. It was impossible for him to not pause momentarily. He felt his nose burning as though a capillary had burst. However, with his resistance combined together with bribe, the effects were reduced. It made his momentary pause only last for an instant, and this was something Senor had no idea of knowing. Therefore, Klein pretended as though he hadn't recovered as he revealed his weak state, waiting for the enemy to fall into his trap. In an ordinary battle, as a wraith was able to jump through mirror-like mediums, making it impossible to determine that location ahead of time, it made it impossible to maintain a 5-meter distance from his opponent, even if he created flames and repeatedly used it to achieve phasing. It caused his spirit body threads, controlling ability to be disrupted momentarily after there were any significant effects. For this, he planned on taking a little risk. He made his opponent fall for a trap he planned, so as to quickly end the battle and escape to the cliff. Seeing his target appear dazed due to the repeated shrieks, Senor didn't hesitate to make his aura turn deep. Admiral of Blood's contracted figure rapidly appeared in Klein's eyes in an abnormally clear manner. This wasn't a reflection of the world, but 2 tiny figures seemingly coming to life in his eyes. When the Wraith's possession was almost close to completion, Klein, with his tattered and charred clothes, unhurriedly extended his left palm as though he was gesturing, "Please," as a polite gentleman. Creeping hunger maintained its sinister and noble blackness as it forcefully distorted Admiral of Blood's target. Due to the freezing halo from before, there was frost and crystalline bodies everywhere around them. All of them were equivalent to a mirror surface. On the thin ice, Senor with his triangular hat had appeared there. His expression was as though he was at a loss. At that moment, creeping hunger switched to a deep black state as Klein said a word filled with foulness, a word that came from the devil language. Slow. Just as he was about to use the mirror surfaces to phase away, Senor instantly froze. His figure involuntarily outlined itself as his body turned extremely rigid. His attempts had failed. US. As there was no way to repeatedly use slow, Klein made his left glove turn pale as it was tinged with a slightly dark green color. Oh, zombie. The ceiling caused by the frost on the ground had once again exacerbated as they rapidly spread to Senor's side, as they began to spread from his toes to turn him into a completed ice sculpture. With his knowledge that wraiths had a very strong resistance to the cold, Klein didn't let his guard down or waste any time. He made creeping hunger transform as if it was gilded. The illusory black threads in his eyes were hidden away as 2 blinding silver bolts of lightning shot out from the innermost depths of his eyes. Interrogator's psychic piercing. In his usual state, Senor's fusion of spirit and flesh typically wouldn't be significantly affected. He could even cause the attack to backfire on his opponent. However, having just recovered from slow, he found himself sealed in ice. All he could do was resist the formless bolt that targeted his spirit body. His mind felt as though a blade had penetrated it as it twisted. The pain spread through his body as he temporarily lost all reason. By the time he regained his lucidity and prepared to make continuous leaps to open up a distance, the cold adventurer opposite him opened his mouth once again. Slow. Dogsh asterisk T. Senor's actions turned sluggish and impeded once again. Then, without any surprises, he suffered from the 2 follow-up attacks of ice stun and psychic piercing. When he barely escaped again, the black-haired, brown-eyed German sparrow opened his mouth a 3rd time with a deadpan expression. Slow. Senor was enraged as he reeled in despair before finding himself stuck in a perpetual cycle. As for Klein, who had kept his opponent in place 3 times, was beginning to control his opponent's spirit body threads. In fact, the most effective solution for when his opponent was unable to escape was to take the opportunity to use Death Knell to deliver 2 or 3 lethal attacks. But his past failures had told him that his enemy had a mystical item that allowed him to be lucky. An overly direct and lethal shot might very well lead to an accident, resulting in some undesirable effects. It was precisely because of this that he decided to gradually proceed in the proper order by controlling Admiral of Blood's spirit body threads. Time quickly passed, as Klein ran around Senor to dodge the possible attacks from the Rose School of Thought into Demigod. He controlled Senor's spirit body threads, and he slowly reached the state of gaining initial control. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. Senor's thoughts instantly turned sluggish, as though every part of his body was rusting. Klein no longer had the strength to use creeping hunger again. He continued deepening his control as he began walking at an adequate speed. No, I can't let this continue. Thoughts slowly moved through Senor's mind as a translucent icicle condensed in front of him. It was dyed with a gloomy green, as though it was showing its respect to the surrounding forest. As for Klein, who had witnessed his opponent's series of slow actions, he unhurriedly retracted his left hand and took out Grossel's travels from his chest and braced himself. So, the icicle finally shot out, seemingly heading for Klein's chest, but it suddenly changed direction midway as it flew diagonally upwards. This adjustment should have been a sudden lethal blow, but as Senor's thoughts had been slowed down significantly, the order received by the icicle had only happened when it was almost reaching Klein. This made the sudden change insufficient to catch Klein by surprise, as he shifted Grossel's travels and easily blocked the attack. Senor's expression turned pale again. After a few seconds of thought, he slowly opened his mouth in an attempt to let out a wraith's shriek. Having already prepared himself, Klein spoke first. Bang! An air bullet quickly shot out and struck Senor in the mouth, throwing his head backward as teeth fell. The shriek was left stuck in his throat. Seeing the control deepen and how Senor's resistance was crumbling bit by bit to the point of losing his reason and launching a barrage of attacks like a lunatic, Klein suddenly felt some joy. At that moment, a shrill, sharp infant's cry sounded and resounded in the woods. Lumps protruded all over Klein's body as he dropped Grossel's travels from his hand. His head felt as though it was being clasped tightly by an invisible hand, making him momentarily lose his senses of his surroundings, including the spirit body threads. His control over Senor was removed as a result. About 100 meters away from them, the large-sized baby, which was black, swollen, and wrinkled, that appeared to have stormed out of the water, had escaped its illusory state and returned to reality. His limbs were long and thin, and there was only an irregular hole on his face. Circling the hole were gnarling teeth. At that moment, Shank's body had an additional wound that was obvious and deep. It was a piercing wound that went through the black and swollen skin, causing putrid blackish-green liquid to gush out. After this, Rose School of Thought's demigod appeared. He stopped dodging or escaping. He began screaming like crazy, letting out infantile screams. It made Klein and Senor fall into a painful stupor. Even their bodies showed signs of losing control. The 4 blond, red-eyed heads were thrown into the void as they opened their mouths and let out a soundless shriek, silencing the terrifying cries. Rayonette, Tinnaker, and Shanks had engaged in another round of combat, phasing between the spirit world and reality from time to time, as they shuttled between leaves, weeds, insect eggs, ice crystals, and thorns. Senor and Klein stood in their spots in a stupor. They tried their best to recover from the effects of the infantile cry. In this aspect, Senor believed that, as a wraith, he had an unsurpassable advantage. The corners of his lips subconsciously curled up a little. He had already figured out what to do with his opponent later. But at that moment, the eyes of the adventurer, who was in tattered clothes while exuding a cold demeanor, had turned lucid. It had only been a second since the infantile cry had ended. Klein, who was experienced in this, quickly recovered as he realized that Senor was still in a dazed and impeded state. An opportunity. His mind stirred, but he didn't attempt a long-distance attack which allowed for plenty of accidents. Instead, he chose to control Senor's spirit-body threads, which took more time. He tapped his right foot as his figure dashed towards his opponent like a panther. His left glove was dark, and when it moved backward, it condensed in a manner that resembled a blade, forming a gigantic weapon formed from lava and flames. Desire Apostle, Sword of Lava, bam! Klein's body passed by Senor's left as the searing sword swept across his chest and got stuck in the middle. The light blue flames ignited Senor, but aside from suffering damage to his body, he didn't lose his life. However, the pain left him yelling incessantly. After the two brushed by each other, Klein immediately abandoned the Sword of Lava. He took a step to his left and turned around, facing Admiral of Blood's back. He raised the iron-black death knell to his opponent's head. Oh, he didn't use lethal attack, and he directly pulled the trigger. With a bang, his body suddenly shook a little. This was because the spot he had stepped onto appeared to be a hole. Hence, Death Knell had slid downwards, and the golden bullet had hit the side of Senor's neck. Blood, tainted with a dark green tinge, spewed out. Admiral of Blood had lost nearly half his neck as he fell forward. He fainted, but he remained alive. Klein was just about to add another shot when the sky suddenly darkened. An arm suddenly reached out. The arm was 10 meters long, and it had a black sticky surface with strange protrusions. They were either skulls, erected eyeballs, or barbed tongues. The moment it appeared, it made the entire forest shake. All the leaves withered as all the insects stiffened into their deaths. All the beasts either fell paralyzed to the ground, or they began biting themselves wildly, leaving their bodies bleeding. Klein's danger premonition reached its limit. He hurriedly closed his eyes, lunged forward, and did a roll. He grabbed Grossel's travels and held it in front of his face. Chapter 729, Chaos. The entire forest was withering as though an entity that was bringing about destruction to everything was about to descend. Just as the arm was about to fully extend, a thick bolt of silver lightning smote down from nowhere, illuminating the entire mountain. The sizzling sounds chained together as a cage only spoken in myths enclosed around the black sticky arm. Dark clouds quickly converged together in the sky, forming brows and a mouth, as though a face was hidden within. In Biome City, the huge commotion was noticed by Sea King Jan Kotman. He didn't hesitate to take action as he ordered the mandated Punishers to activate the corresponding sealed artifacts. Rayonette Tinnaker's figure was forced out of the void, but her complicated black dress didn't seem crumpled at all. She raised her left hand as two of the blonde, red-eyed heads flew back and landed on her severed neck. The remaining two continued engaging in combat with the black, swollen, and wrinkled infant. When the cut at her neck began to wriggle, two corresponding cuts were connected. Her figure instantly burgeoned to the size of a Gothic castle. Patterns, vines, and accessories appeared on the surface, interweaving into a mysterious, sinister sight that couldn't be looked at. Klein closed his eyes tight as he placed Grossel's travels in front of his face, injecting his spirituality into it, but he was unable to eliminate all the effects inflicted upon him. His body kept quivering as granules kept protruding from his body. And only at this moment did he confirm that the side effect of using Death Knell was a fear of the dark. For the next 6 hours he wouldn't suffer any more weaknesses. Thankfully, the weakness is just insurmountable, but it doesn't mean that I'm unable to resist for a short period of time. Klein desperately closed his eyes as tears kept rolling down his cheeks. He didn't spend time considering the problems regarding this, because the situation had developed into one of extreme danger, but it was also very chaotic. The one that descended seems to be stronger than Sea King. It's likely an angel, but his condition doesn't seem to be particularly good as well. He didn't directly appear, and he instead used the spirit world to attack. Is it because he can't rush here in time and could only consider using this method? Thankfully, I received a warning from Orange Light. Otherwise, the results would be unthinkable if this situation drags on. As Klein's thoughts flashed through his mind, his first reaction was to take the opportunity to flee and open up a safe distance. However, he knew that hastily retreating without any preparations was equally dangerous. If the Rose School of Thought's angel abandons the attack and retracts his arm, Sea King Jan Koltman wouldn't have any motivation in embroiling himself in a pursuit effort. This is because he isn't facing a saint who he can consider retaining. This way, simply relying on Miss Messenger, Renette Tinneker, makes it difficult to stop this entity. I might be pursued again when the time comes. I have to add more trouble for him, making him temporarily unable to leave. I'll take this opportunity to escape the waters where Blue Mountain Island is. As his thoughts churned, Klein followed his emergency plans, took out Grossel's travels, stuffed Death Knell inside, and made a few rolls before arriving next to the iron cigar case. He stabbed it with his finger, removing the wall of spirituality and opening the case, and he threw tinder, which was corrupted by the true creator, into the air towards the source of the danger. Right on the heels of that, Klein used Grossel's travels to shield the top of his head, opened his eyes, and took out a whistle. This wasn't Azik's copper whistle, but the numinous episcopate copper whistle which he had obtained from a mysticism enthusiast in Backlund. It originated from a resurrected numinous episcopate member. Back then, Klein had made a divination about the copper whistle, and he received a revelation that sending a message would be extremely dangerous. At that moment, he decided to allow extreme danger to meet extreme danger, so as to create an even more chaotic situation that benefited him. He quickly put the copper whistle to his mouth and blew into it. Then he activated his spirit vision without daring to look up. A skull with 3 lifeless eyes emerged. Around it were black appendage-like tentacles. Without any hesitation, Klein handed over a white feather left behind by the resurrected numinous episcopate member to the messenger. He didn't wait for the messenger to disappear as he immediately bulged his muscles, swung his arm, and threw the copper whistle into the air where the source of danger was. With that done, he put away the iron cigar case, did another roll, and bounced up as he rushed straight for the cliff. During this process, he kept his head down and kept changing location. He didn't dare to look at the scene happening above him, nor did he dare to stay any longer. When he passed by the spot where Admiral of Blood Senya should have been lying unconscious, Klein's gaze suddenly froze. He was alarmed to find that he had vanished. In that chaotic situation, without any aid, this wraith, who had suffered immense damage and was unable to maintain his spirit-body state, had vanished. Klein paused as he swept his gaze. He saw that ahead of him were a few drops of splattered, dark red blood that coruscated with a dark green tint. And this region was where Grossel's travels had previously dropped. No way. A few drops of Admiral of Blood's blood dropped onto the book's cover. This sucked him in. Klein frowned, as he didn't think it was a good thing. He was afraid that the angel and saint that the Mother Tree of Desire had sent was able to gain the help of Admiral of Blood from within Grossel's travels to pursue him. However, it was impossible for him to abandon the book. Without it, Klein didn't believe that he was lucky enough to dodge all the stray blasts and unknown shrapnel which could fall from the sky at any moment. I'll resolve this latent risk by entering with my spirit body after I escape. As a few thoughts rose up in his mind, Klein dipped the tip of his foot down as he ran, lifting up the soil which had Signor's blood on it, reached out and grabbed a handful. This was used to locate Admiral of Blood later. Tap, tap, tap. Klein ran in a meandering manner, holding Grossel's travels over his head, making adjustments from time to time based on his premonition for danger. The book blocked the random bolts of lightning or the scattering rain of corroding rock, and it shielded him from a terrifying gaze that was cast over. With the book, Klein successfully tore out of the lifeless forest and came to the edge of a cliff. At this moment, the surroundings turned dark. It wasn't the kind of darkness before a storm, nor was it a result of a moonless or starless night. It was a dead silence that emanated the smell of rot. Ravings sounded out from varying distances and at varying pitches, as though something seemed to be slowly breathing in the air. Klein, who was afraid of the dark, trembled. He didn't dare to look at what was happening above him. All he noticed was a few white feathers, stained with yellowish oil, spiraling down to the ground nearby when there was a flash of lightning. His right foot took a stride forward as he jumped off the cliff and plummeted straight down. He fell out of the darkness and could see light. Then he dropped into a mouth that had been waiting for him for a long time. The mouth didn't have any teeth, as it immediately closed and sank to the bottom of the sea. According to the agreement they had made previously, it was to head for a reef beyond Blue Mountain Island as quickly as possible. This was a gigantic undersea creature with 16 fins on its back. In the darkness, Klein instinctively wished to huddle into a ball and helplessly tremble, but he barely repressed his emotions and took out a priest of light, beyond a characteristic he had prepared to deal with wraiths. He had obtained it through the glove. Pure light emanated from the translucent stone-like object as it drove away Klein's fear. He was just about to contemplate if he should wait for the outcome, or if he should attempt something, when he suddenly felt the back of his palm become itchy. He hurriedly looked down and saw his pores widen as they grew some fine white hair. These fine hair rapidly grew and looked like feathers. Klein immediately felt his entire body itch. The fellow that was attracted by the copper whistle is really very dangerous. Klein was rather experienced. He immediately stood up and took 4 steps counterclockwise while chanting the incantation in the undersea creature's mouth. His spirit body once again tore through the grayish-white, which had endless ravings and roars as blackish-green gases drilled out of his body. Returning to the palace that looked like a giant's residence, Klein observed his spirit body once again, and he discovered that it had returned to normal. There weren't any of the blackish-green gases, nor were there any white feathers. Phew, it's effective. He exhaled and immediately returned to the real world. With the illumination from the Priest of Light, beyond her characteristic, Klein saw that the white feathers on the back of his hands remained, but they had lost the ability to continue growing. There were more or less some signs in other parts of his body, but they weren't obvious. Yes, I should be able to resolve the remaining problems once Mr. Isaac arrives. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and drew the crimson moon on his chest. He prayed for the goddess's blessing and that Mr. Isaac would arrive quickly. At this moment, Rayonette Tinnacare's figure appeared before him. Miss Messenger had 3 heads growing on her head while she held one in her hand. Compared to before, she appeared more lively. She reached out with her left palm and grabbed Klein's shoulder, and she directly brought him into the spirit world as they quickly traveled through it. Midst brightly stacked colors, Klein felt somewhat dizzy before he returned to reality and realized that he was on a reef. Rayonette Tinnacare's 4 heads swept the area and said, "Already. Safe. Remember to pay. Next time." With that said, she vanished as though she had something more important to do. You could do that. I should have just gotten Miss Messenger to bring me away using such a method. However, her present state doesn't seem to be that great either. This must be a state and method she seldom uses. As Klein reflected over the matter, he placed the Priest of Light Beyonder characteristic into his pocket, and he kept Grossel's travels outside. Just as he was about to size up his surroundings to figure out where he was, another arm reached out and grabbed his shoulder. Klein jumped in fright as he hurriedly turned his head, only to discover that Mr. Azik had arrived. Azik grabbed his shoulder and pulled him into the spirit world once again. They rapidly moved through the brightly stacked colors. "Actually, I'm already safe." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched, but he didn't say those words. Chapter 730. Handling the Latent Risk. On a mountain outside Biome City, in a forest that had lost all its vitality because it was buried by a half-collapsed cliff. A tall, stocky, middle-aged man with deep blue hair was wearing a storm priest robe as he stood in the air and overlooked the area. There was a clear burning rage in his eyes. He was none other than the Church of Storm's Cardinal, Archbishop of the Rorsted Sea, high-ranking deacon of the mandated Punishers, Sea King Jan Kotman. At that moment, the battle from before was still fresh in Kotman's mind. He remembered how every participant in the battle retreated. The angel from the Rose School of Thought had used a particular method to transfer his powers over from a great distance. After he failed to achieve his objectives, he rather easily brought away his heavily injured partner, and no one wanted him to stay, aside from the strange monster that appeared out of nowhere. Jan Kotman remembered very vividly that when the angel retracted his arm, it had sparse white feathers on the black sticky arm. From the top of the skull and from inside the erected eye, they grew from unimaginable spots. And all of this was because the Rose School of Thought's angel was dodging the glove with the true creator's aura while using some of his strength to shatter what seemed like an ordinary copper whistle. Shortly after the sinister and strange spirit world creature engaged in battle with the angel, it voluntarily retreated into the depths of the spirit world, preventing Jan Kotman from pursuing it. The Aurora Order Saint, who had opened a door of teleportation, didn't participate in the battle. After observing the situation in puzzlement, he picked up the glove with the true creator's aura, and he opened the door to leave before the battle ended. The strange monster that was summoned because of the copper whistle didn't have a fixed form. He was like the manifestation of death itself. He was like a mist that filled the surroundings but had many feathers with yellowish marks on it. His target was obvious, the angel of the Rose School of Thought. Before the latter escaped, he had also vanished from the area as though it were in pursuit of his target. But even so, Jan Kotman, who had taken a sealed artifact from the city and rushed here, still felt uneasy. It felt like suddenly jumping forward while on his long journey towards death. The only person without any godhood had fled the scene before Jan Kotman arrived, and he was nowhere to be found. However, Jan Kotman recognized him. He was an adventurer who had killed a Sequence 5 Desire Apostle, making him qualified to have his information placed on Sea King's desk. Although this wasn't something that he needed to pay great attention to, Jan Kotman, who had experienced the Seafarer sequence, still remembered the relevant information. He cast his gaze towards the cliff and looked down at the crashing waves as he muttered a name, German Sparrow. On an island in unknown waters, Klein and Azik's figures were rapidly outlined on the shore. Klein was just about to speak when the hat-wearing, bronze-skinned Azik's eyes suddenly turned dark, as though it was connected to a silent and dark world. He grabbed the air with his right hand, and all the undeveloped white feathers flew out and curled into a bundle, landing in his palm. With a gentle squeeze, all the strange feathers vanished, as though they had turned into food for the silent world in his eyes. Mr. Razik, this was brought about by that numinous episcopate whistle. Klein first pointed out the matter before explaining in detail. The situation was somewhat pressing, and to make the situation even more chaotic, I blew that copper whistle and gave that feather to the messenger. Then a similar feeling from the underworld descended. I didn't stay, and I immediately left the area, but I still had these feathers on my body. Azik, with his soft facial features, nodded gently and said, I sensed it from afar. It shouldn't be an ordinary high-sequence beyonder. I suspect that it's a byproduct of the numinous episcopate's artificial death project. Is that so? So it succeeded in holding back that Rose School of Thought angel, Klein thought in joy. Azik looked around and continued. I still have matters that require my attention. This might awaken more of my memories. When all of that is done, I'll look for you again to claim that ring left behind by ancient death. I have a feeling that I might need to make a trip to the Berserk Sea or the southern continent. It's best if you head over to large cities like Backlund or Trier. In those places, the forces the Rose School of Thought can deploy are very limited. They wouldn't dare to act rashly. Of course, it's best that you choose places like Pasu Island, where major churches have their headquarters, but this will bring about another type of danger. Azik's last sentence was a joke, just like an ordinary lone gentleman. The experiences of his present life seemed to leave a deep impression on him. Regardless of the portion of memories that he had recovered, he still showed clear signs of his old self. In situations regarding retained memories, the time span of decades shouldn't have much of an influence on the time span of millennia, but from a state of complete memory loss, 2 to 3 decades is enough to remold a person. After Mr. Azik completely recovers his memories, will his many different lives result in him having different personalities? What a profound question. I'll let Miss Justice consider it later, and seek advice from the psychology alchemists. As Klein was thinking, he secretly heaved a sigh of relief when he realized that Mr. Azik wasn't delving into why he had a conflict with the Rose School of Thought. Instead, he asked, Mr. Azik, do you know anything about the Mother Tree of Desire? Azik shook his head. I didn't even know of her existence before you sent me the letter. You didn't know the Mother Tree of Desire. Klein was taken aback as he switched to asking, then what about the Chained God? Azik shook his head again as he said with a smiling sigh, in ancient times she or they might have had other names. That's right. Mr. Azik began the cycle of losing and finding his memories at the end of the 4th epic. He kept wandering the northern continent, while the Rose School of Thought was born in the early 5th epic in the southern continent. Klein nodded and didn't ask further, and since Azik had matters which needed his attention, he gave a few words of advice before bringing him to traverse across the spirit world until he arrived at a particular beach on the northern continent's eastern shore. With Mr. Azik gone, Klein looked at the seawater that kept surging towards the shore for a few seconds. He wasn't in a rush to head for the nearby city. Instead, he found an uninhabited cave, set up a simple ritual, and created a wall of spirituality. He sacrificed creeping hunger, death knell, Azik's copper whistle, Grossel's travels, and the soil with Signor's blood to the mysterious space above the gray fog. Then he walked 4 steps counterclockwise and entered the mysterious space. He took the seat which belonged to the fool, and he summoned a metal bottle. As it was stored above the gray fog, the remnant blood in the tiny bottle didn't coagulate. After wearing his glove and stuffing the other items, Klein poured a few drops and smeared it over Grossel's Travels' dark brown cover. Oh, why doesn't a brand new story start right from the beginning with the addition of a new character? Klein looked at the book that didn't change its name as he suddenly felt puzzled. Before he had the time to think, his vision turned into a blur as though there were countless translucent creatures hidden around him. Everything soon turned clear, and Klein found himself sitting on a long wooden chair along the street. This was where he had departed from previously. "There's a saving function," Klein joked inwardly as he took out the mud stained with Signor's blood before snapping a tree branch to attempt divination. Following the results he received, he walked out of the city, entered a nearby forest, and found the unconscious Admiral of Blood beside a small stream. At this moment, only about 10 minutes had passed since the battle. The exaggerated wounds on Signor's neck, chest, and abdomen were contracting and appeared to have recovered significantly. Such a level of vitality was completely different from a human's. In another 15 to 30 minutes, Admiral of Blood would likely wake up, and in another 1 to 2 hours his mobility would be restored. This was a zombie, a wraith. You had a chance of being rescued by your organization's angel and demigod, but your blood happened to splatter onto Grossel's Travels, making you a prisoner of this book and giving me enough time to handle you. Of course, this made you avoid the stray attacks of the battle between demigods, preventing you from dying immediately. I've no idea if you'd call this good or bad luck," Klein mumbled as he observed while grasping Death Knell in his hand and reaching out to Signor's neck and removing the necklace made of pure silver. The necklace had a pendant of the same color which resembled an ancient coin. Both sides were filled with mysterious patterns and relevant symbols, as well as words carved in ancient Hermes. "You will be as unlucky as you are lucky now. This is the mystical item which raises Admiral of Blood's luck. Unfortunately, even a demigod can't enhance my luck, so I doubt it can. I can sell it for money, or I could ask Miss Messenger if I can use this to make a partial payment." Klein wasn't in a hurry to take the necklace as he placed it on the stone beside him. He was afraid that there were unknown side effects that might affect the things he was about to do. Then Klein focused as he controlled Admiral of Blood's spirit body threads. He wanted to make his first marionette, which he would use for an extended period of time so as to conclude the principles of a marionettist. Furthermore, no marionette was more convenient to bring around than a wraith. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. In just 10 seconds, Klein achieved initial control. Signor's spiritual intuition sensed the danger as his body showed obvious signs of struggling, but he was unable to wake up due to his heavy injuries and sluggish thoughts. Time ticked by, and by the 4th minute, Klein didn't hide his sigh of relief. At that moment, Admiral of Blood Signor opened his eyes, rolled to his feet, and faced him. With a harmonious series of actions, he pressed his chest and bowed. "Good morning, sir. How may I be of service?" Chapter 7. 131. Gains. Illusory black threads emanated out of Signor's body and entered Klein's hands. With every jolt in spirituality, it gave a different reaction. In fact, there was no need to use both hands when controlling the spirit body threads. Klein was just accustomed to doing so, as it gave him a feeling like he was truly controlling a puppet. From the looks of it, other marionettists can discover each other's marionettes. The Señor's abnormality can't be hidden from their eyes, so I have to be careful about this. Klein concluded the problems he discovered, and he quickly turned his thoughts back onto Señor. This Admiral of Blood was dead. His spirit body had become a vessel for the marionette, losing any traits that belonged to him. Therefore, many divination methods were ineffective against him. Of course, methods to seek his corpse were still effective. Klein planned on cleansing the wraith in the gray fog before using paper angels to envelop the mirror-like objects that he had possessed before placing him into a cigar case that was sealed by a wall of spirituality, along with Azik's copper whistle. This created a 3-layered interference effect. This way, Klein believed that, even if the Rose School of Thought Angel wished to, it was impossible to use divination to lock onto his position via Admiral of Blood. As for whether the Mother Tree of Desire had left any back doors in Señor's body, he wasn't too worried. This was because if that really happened, she could have mutated Señor during the demigod battle royale in order to deal with him. Based on the situation back then, there was a guaranteed chance of success. Mother Tree of Desire, or should I say, the Chained God, strictly controls its organization's members. It relies on a vow contract and other methods that are ingrained into the soul. This can be inferred from Miss Sharon's descriptions and my interaction with the corresponding characteristics. As long as I don't attempt to use Admiral of Blood to divine the secrets of the Rose School of Thought or the potion formula of the mutant pathway, I wouldn't trigger any problems. The Werewolf Beyonder characteristic has remained normal despite being above the gray fog for so long. Besides, there's still the gray fog cleansing process. If there are any latent problems, it should be washed out. Klein thought for a while and took out Azik's copper whistle from inside his body. He turned his right wrist and made the side with fewer patterns appear under the sunlight, making it reflect the light. Immediately, the copper whistle had Señor's figure appear on it as it rapidly turned clear. The Admiral of Blood in front of Klein suddenly vanished as a result. Perhaps the Mother Tree of Desire can use the vow contract and other methods to vaguely lock on, but that doesn't matter. She can sense the gray fog's unique trait on me anyway, and she will sense me once I'm within range. Besides, this marionette might be destroyed at any time when I use it as a shield. Klein was like a jobless tramp who was debt-laden. He felt that there was almost nothing he was afraid of. Of course, he really was debt-ridden. As long as I advance to a demigod and can hide my unique trait, it's fine losing marionettes. Klein surveyed the area as he bent his back to pick up the silver necklace. He took 4 steps counterclockwise while chanting the incantation softly. This time, he hadn't entered via summoning his spirit body, so he couldn't directly return. The grayish-white fog was quickly emanated as hysterical ravings and roars echoed for an eternity. Azik's copper whistle didn't react abnormally, which meant that there weren't any latent problems with Admiral of Blood. Sitting at the end of the bronze table, Klein placed Azik's copper whistle in front of him, making Señor, who was dressed in a dark red coat and old triangular hat, appear. He was like a butler awaiting orders from his master. "Do you have any other items on you?" Klein asked, as though Admiral of Blood was still alive. This was his attempt to act as a marionettist. Following that, he controlled Señor, made him rummage through every pocket as he subsequently took out 325 pounds, 16 soldi, and 8 pence in cash. There were also 13 gold coins. Apart from that, perhaps due to his frequent act of transforming into a wraith state, Señor didn't carry anything else on him. How poor. As a pirate admiral, you don't even have a single mystical item. Did you hand it over to the Rose School of Thought, or your subordinates? Klein seriously considered cashing out Admiral of Blood via the black market. Just in Lowen alone, he was worth 42,000 pounds. Yes, claiming the bounty from Lowen isn't pragmatic. Be it the Church of Storms and the Kingdom's military, they will follow the clues to capture Garamond Sparrow, who managed to embroil so many demigods in a battle royale, and then investigate the organization backing him. They wouldn't even pay, and they might even plant a trap. By the same logic, the churches and governments of other countries must have similar ideas. However, they might be easier to work with. Retrieving the bounty will require substantial risks. Besides, there's no rush. I'll send Signor out when I plan on switching marionettes. After all, being a marionette for a few days won't change his identity or value. Klein reined in his thoughts and cast his gaze on the silver necklace with an ancient coin attached to it. He immediately used divination to gain the gist of its origins and usage. It came from a Sequence 5 winner from the Life School of Thought. After dying at the hands of a Rose School of Thought demigod, this gentleman's Beyonder characteristic and psyche fused with an ordinary silver necklace that he carried with him, turning into a mystical item. As for the reason why the ordinary silver necklace would be carried by a Sequence 5 powerhouse for extended periods of time, Klein was unable to receive any effective revelations from it, as it had been too long and it had been corrupted. The mystical item had two uses. One was to passively make the wearer lucky. In their daily lifestyle, the owner would encounter good things, easily succeeding in whatever they did. When suffering a lethal blow or terrifying disaster, ridiculous scenes would happen, allowing them to be successfully rescued. The latter situation only lasted for 10 minutes. The second use was to actively give an enemy bad luck, making the target unlucky. Be it in daily life or combat, it was easy for them to experience failure due to some trivial problem. The corresponding negative effects of the necklace was the conservation of luck. After being lucky, they would immediately meet with repeated bad luck. They would be as unlucky as they were lucky before. It needed the wearer to be devoted and seriously avoid any danger. Otherwise, it was very easy for them to die in a comedic manner and even harm people around them. The luck received in one's daily life would often revert back after a month. The user would end up unlucky, regardless of whether they wore it or not. However, such bad luck was slowly released, so it wasn't too dangerous. And luck obtained in combat would similarly strike back 10 minutes later in a similar vigor. Overall, this is a rather good mystical item, but I don't have much use for it. After all, Fate Counselor Ricciardo was unable to change my luck. I'll just wear it on me for now. It has few negative effects on me. I'll sell it if there's a chance to pay off my debt with Miss Messenger. Miss Messenger wants gold coins while I have gold pounds. It's nearly impossible to exchange 10,000 gold coins through the banks or official markets. From the looks of it, I'll have to do it in batches, getting each Tarot Club member to change some of it. Klein soon decided on a plan as he casually came up with a name for the necklace: Scales of Luck. Following that, he cast his gaze onto Senor, who was standing reverently to his side. He began to study the powers a wraith had. Forceful possession, enemy control, wraith's shriek, mirror blink, obstacle penetration, death-related spells, and invisibility that wouldn't be discovered by most mid- and low-sequence Beyonders. Klein distinguished each power, and he matched them with Sharon's and Marek's description, as well as his experience gained from combat. He soon concluded this, afraid that the candle in the outside world would finish burning, and a dark cave was extremely bad for the present, him who had a phobia of the dark. Klein immediately took out a paper figurine from the junk pile, and together with the Black Emperor card, he stirred some of the powers above the gray fog, turning it into an anti-divination angel. This angel rapidly spread its wings and wrapped around a gold coin. On its reflective side was Signor's figure. Then Klein brought the gold coin, a Zeke's copper whistle, death knell, and his suitcase back to the real world. As for Creeping Hunger and Grossel's travels, one of them hadn't been fed, and the other might cause Klein to be swallowed into the book for carrying it for too long. Therefore, they were left in the junk pile above the gray fog. Having returned to the cave, Klein hurriedly placed the gold coin and Zeke's copper whistle into a cigar case before sealing it with a wall of spirituality. He cleaned up the scene, switched into formal clothes, and carried his suitcase. He followed the beach until he came to a residential area. He discovered that he was near Pritz Harbor. He didn't immediately return to Backlund. Instead, he changed his appearance, took a steam locomotive, and headed for Conant City in Desi Bay. He planned on circling the area once before changing his identity again. Banzi Harbor. Alger Wilson looked at the destroyed city under the afternoon sun. He saw that the buildings had completely collapsed and there were deep chasms in the ground and charred spots everywhere. Such a scene extended into the depths of the island. Even the mountain had collapsed. At that moment, there wasn't anyone from the Church of Storms watching the ruins, since there wasn't anything here. And the plans to rebuild the harbor wasn't brought forward at all. Alger jumped off the Blue Avenger and circled the ruins with his sailors, but they didn't discover anything of value. "Let's go," he instructed with a staid attitude. He soon boarded the ship, which hoisted its sails and left the island. After an unknown period of time, a figure suddenly walked out from the depths of the ruins. He wore a double-breasted, pure black clerical robe. He had dark golden hair, and his facial features were clear and distinct, like an ancient classical sculpture. His eyes were dark blue, nearing black. They looked lusterless, but they were filled with dense blood capillaries. Chapter 7, 132, Destination, Desi County, Conant City, 67 Red Indus Street. Wearing a commonly seen face in the Lowen Kingdom, Klein took a step forward and rang the doorbell. In less than a minute, the door creaked open as a maidservant looked out and asked out of curiosity, "Good evening. Who might you be looking for?" "I'm here to find Ma'am Nilu. I'm a friend of her father, Davy Raymond," Klein answered calmly. Derek Raymond was the nightmare who he had released from Creeping Hunger. It was a red glove from the Nighthawks, and the first thing on his mind before he dissipated was his daughter, Nilu Raymond. He was very apologetic towards her for not spending time with her while she grew up, making her effectively lose her father when she had already lost her mother. Klein had promised him that he would make a visit to the beautiful coastal city if he had the chance to visit his daughter. Having probed for more information earlier, Klein had gained a general idea about Nilu Raymond's situation. After this girl graduated from grammar school, she worked at the Women and Children Care Foundation, which was run by the Church of the Ebonite Goddess. She had a weekly salary of £2.10 and was the target of envy by her neighbors. She also inherited an inheritance from her businessman father. As for how much it was, no one knew. They just knew that she was richer than most people from the middle class. Typically speaking, women with such wealth would place great emphasis on their marriage. They would repeatedly select and observe candidates, resulting in their late marriage. However, Nilu had married to a civil servant just a year later. As both parties were believers of the Ebonite Goddess, she didn't take on her husband's last name. She continued going by the name Nilu Raymond, and she continued staying at 67 Red Indus Street. After hearing Klein's answer, the maidservant quickly requested him to wait as she entered the living room to report to her mistress. Before long, a woman in a home dress walked to the door. She had black hair and blue eyes. Her face was rather thin, and she was rather pretty. She resembled Davy Raymond. "Good evening, sir. I'm Nilu, Davy Raymond's daughter. May I know when you got to know my father?" Nilu Raymond asked politely but warily. Klein took off his hat and smiled. "I got to know him at sea. It's been several years." Nilu Raymond swept him with a wary gaze and said, "Perhaps you might not know, but he has already passed away." Klein sighed and replied, "Yes, I know. I got to know him through that disaster. He had some words to say back then which I didn't think too much about. However, the more I thought about it in recent years, the more I felt that I should inform you." "Is that so?" Nilu said softly. After some thought, she invited him. "Please come in. Would you mind if my husband listens in?" "This is up to you to decide," Klein frankly replied. Nilu nodded and led Klein into the study. Her husband had the looks of an ordinary civil servant with a gentleman's bearing. He put down his newspapers and followed them in. After both parties sat down, Klein looked at the couple on the sofa and deliberated. Mr. Davy Raymond once experienced disaster after another. He lost his father, mother, wife, brothers, and sisters. Nilu nodded with a deadpan expression. "I know." Klein thought and continued, "He appears to be a merchant, but he was, in fact, seeking out the murderers who caused that disaster." "I know." Nilu didn't object to it. Klein glanced at her and continued, "He dedicated himself to this matter, and he was very regretful that he didn't manage to spend time with you growing up, making you lose your father alongside your mother." Nilu fell silent for a second before she rapidly replied, "I know." Klein swept his gaze to the old books around him and sighed silently. "He said that his greatest wish was to see you enter the hall of marriage under the witness of the goddess, to have your own family, and to not be lonely anymore. I believe he should be very happy right now." Nilu's gaze slowly moved away from Klein's face as she turned agape, answering only 2 seconds later. "I know." Klein leaned forward slightly as he clasped his hands. "He said that he might die at sea, and he wanted me to tell you that he died as a result of an accident. All the murderers from before have already been punished. You do not need to hate anyone. He also said that he loves you very much and that he's very sorry." Nilu remained silent for a few seconds as she blinked. She turned her head to the side and scoffed with an unclear attitude. "Got it." Klein gave her a deep look before getting up. "I'm done passing on the message. It's time I leave." Met with silence, Nilu's husband nodded gently as a gesture of thanks. Klein turned around, walked to the door of the study. Just as he twisted the doorknob, Nilu Raymond's voice sounded from behind him, deep and hoarse. "What kind of person do you think he was?" Klein fell silent for a second, turned his head and curled his lips. He said with a smile, "A guardian." He didn't stay any longer as he opened the door and walked to the coat rack. When he wore his hat and left 67 Red Indus Street, soft, restrained sobbing suddenly drilled into his ears. Shaking his head silently, Klein left the borough and entered a cathedral of the Evernite goddess. Passing through the dark and serene aisle, he sat in the 7th row from the back. He faced the crimson half-moon and the black sacred emblem filled with resplendent stars. He took off his hat, lowered his head, and held his hands to his mouth, just like the many believers present. While praying silently in the silence and tranquility, time quickly passed. Klein slowly opened his eyes as he gently stood up. At the spot where he sat, he left behind an item wrapped in paper. Klein walked along the aisle and left the prayer hall, going straight to the cathedral's entrance. With his back facing the hall, he wore his hat, raised his right hand, and snapped his fingers. Pa! The paper suddenly ignited where he sat, garnering the priest's attention. When this gentleman rushed over, the flames had already extinguished, leaving behind a dark, gem-like item. Aye, this is... Although the priest didn't know what the item was, his spiritual perception told him that it was very important. When he and the other priests rushed outside the cathedral, the gentleman in a tailcoat and half-top hat had already disappeared, Bessa. The next morning, through a local black market, Klein had obtained a new identity as he came to the steam locomotive station. In his hand was a second-class ticket worth 18 soldi, as well as identification documents for himself. He held a black leather suitcase as he stood at the platform with his back straight, awaiting the arrival of the train headed for Bachland. The present him was a middle-aged man who was nearing his 40s. He was slightly more than 180 centimeters tall, and his black hair had a few silver strands. His deep blue eyes were like a lake at night, and he was rather good-looking. He gave off mature and elegant vibes. Looking down at the identification documents, Klein's eyes reflected his present name, Dwayne Dantes. After some thought, he placed the suitcase on the ground, laid it down, and opened it before stuffing all his identification documents inside. Inside the suitcase, there was a black wooden box containing the former Lowen soldier, Frunziar Edward's ashes. Moments after arranging his suitcase, he heard a whistle. A steam train chugged into the station, spewing smoke before it slowed down to a halt. He looked up and cast his gaze forward as he examined it in silence. Then he looked down at his suitcase and whispered, "It's time to return." He then stood straight, carried his belongings, and walked to the open carriage door. Bachland, Sherwood Bachland, 26 Gunstedt Street. Benson took off his hat, removed his coat, and handed it to the maidservant. He looked at his sister, Melissa, who was glued to her book in the living room. The entrance examinations are in June. You'll finally experience the pain of studiously studying that I endured back then. Melissa didn't look up as she continued reading. I'm studiously studying every day. A little humor, Melissa. A little humor. What's the difference between a person without humor and a curly-haired baboon? Benson said with a smile. Melissa casually glanced at him and said, "That wasn't what you said in the past." She didn't correct him on what the exact difference was between humans and curly-haired baboons, and she instead said, "Do civil servants also finish work so late?" "No, there's been a lot of work recently. As you know, oh, you don't, in such a huge reform, the handing over of work and the straightening out of different relationships are very troublesome." Benson swept the mirror in the living room. He couldn't help but lift his hand to comb his hair as he said, with a look of displeasure, "Although I'm only a low-ranking employee in the Ministry of Finance, that doesn't stop me from having plenty of work. The only thing to be happy about it that I've finally survived the dawn probationary period. I'll soon have a weekly salary of £3. Melissa put down her book, and she walked to the dining hall and said to Benson, "It's dinner time." She paused and said very seriously, "I read in the papers that there's something called Donningsman tree sap that has a significant effect on boosting hair growth." Benson's face immediately had mixed expressions. Whoosh! Amidst the whistle, the long steam locomotive chugged into Bachland. Klein picked up his suitcase and once again stepped into the capital of capitals, the land of hope. He discovered that the smog had thinned significantly, and there wasn't the obvious palish yellow colors. The gas street lamps on the platform were already turned on, dispersing the gloominess and darkness. Surveying the area, Klein walked out the steam locomotive station, took the metro and a carriage, and came to a Church of Storms cemetery outside Westborough. Then he spent a little bit of money and placed Frunziar Edward's ashes into a partition. By then, this lone soldier had already left Baklund for more than 165 years. After taking a step back, Klein observed it for a moment before using a pen and paper to engrave something on the partition door. Frunziar Edward,